instructor Paul LU and domain users. If I say new user and I create P or Paul Hill and I call it P Hill for my username, and I click next, and I'll just make a password here really fast. Again, I'll say a user must uncheck that checkbox and finish. Okay, so if I double click on this really fast, I need to make sure action under view, advanced features. This needs to be enabled to be able to do what I'm about to do. So I'm going to double click on this user, and I'm going to go to the attribute editor. And if we type in the user principal name, so right here we can see it's P Hill at instructor Paul. Now the SAM account name is just P Hill. So if we're searching for P Hill, you know, we created this user account using the user principal name and not the SAM account name, this will be defined as not set. Alright. So we're going to go back to our PowerShell here, and I think we're about ready to move on down to these functions and complete these functions. So what we're going to do is under verify name, we're going to set an initial variable for I. So I is going to represent the number that we're going to add to the end of our username. Now remember, this function is, the only goal of this function is to see if the username is in use. If it is, return the number that should be appended to the username. So what should be added to the end of the name? If nothing is, or if the username is not in use, we want to return a blank string or something like this. And I can just elaborate on this. So, example, P Hill 1, P Hill 2, etc. Okay? So we're either going to return a number, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, or we're going to return an empty string, which would make our username look exactly like this. Alright, so I is equal to 1. Now we're going to write an if statement. And we're going to say, see if username is taken. Or in use. Okay. So we're going to say if, and we're going to call this function down here, username taken. So if username taken, and we're going to pass the username that we're checking. So if this is equal to true, this username is taken, then what we need to do is run a while loop. So we're going to say while username taken. Now make sure I spell that right, otherwise it won't work. While username is taken is equal to, oops, we need to write username is equal to true. Okay, repeat this. And what we're going to repeat is incrementing I. Okay, now let me elaborate on what we're doing. So what we're doing is we're running a check to say if the username is in use, or if it's already taken, which is a function we haven't written down here yet. But this is going to return a true or false based on whether that user already exists. And it's just going to be a get AD user query that we're going to run. And then if we find a match, we'll say, hey, that user is already used, you can't use it. So if that happens, if it's equal to true, and that user already exists, then we need to increment I. And that little, if you're not familiar, we define I equals 1 like we're doing up here at the top of the code. We say I equals 1, we can echo I. Again, there's my keyboard not letting work. So we can echo I, and that outputs 1 down here in the bottom left. Now if we type in the command I++, that's going to increment 1 by 1. So now if I echo I, it's equal to 2. And I can type that again, and it's going to equal 3. Okay? So what we're doing is essentially we're incrementing the number that we're going to add to the end of the username because that user is still in use. Okay, so now what we're going to do under this if statement, we're going to write else, and we're going to say return quote quote, or an empty string. So if the username is taken, then we're going to increment I and we're going to try and use that. If it's not taken, we're going to return just an empty string. All right. And this loop is going to break once we've looped, or once we found a username that is not taken. All right. So once we find phill3 or phill4, it's not in use, then what we need to do also real quick, we need to add the I to the end of this. So plus. So while username taken, let me get rid of that there. That doesn't belong there. Okay. Sorry about that. So while username taken and then username plus I is equal to true, we're going to increment I. And then else return blank. And then once it breaks this loop, it says, hey, I found a username that is not used to phill3 or phill4. We're going to return the number I. Okay? So again, if you remember, the whole point of this function is to see if a username is in use. If it is, return the number that should be appended to the end of the name, which is this line right here. Okay, if the username is not in use, return an empty string, which is going to be completed right here. All right. Really, I think we could probably put this return I up here inside of this else statement, but I'm just going to leave it down there because I'm not too worried about that. Okay, so now what we're going to do is comment it for this function. We're going to say check to see if username already exists. All right, and we're going to run a couple tests. The first thing we're going to do is we'll just call it test 1, and then we're going to write test 2. Oops, test 2. Okay, so test 1 is equal to get AD user. And we're going to say filter, and then we're going to do an open brace, and we're going to say user principal name. Make sure I spell this right. Principal name is equal to, and then we're going to say username. And we're going to do the closing brace there. And we're going to copy this. Fix that right there. I didn't mean to press enter. Let's copy this little line of code right here, and we'll put it down in the next line. And we're going to change this to Sam account name. Okay, so if I copy this line of code right here, and I just paste it down here below, and if I change this to, in quotation marks, P Hill, and press enter, I can echo test 2, and I can see that I was able to find Paul Hill or P Hill. Now, if I run that again and I look for P Hill 1, and if I try to echo test 2, and press enter, it returns nothing. So essentially, it wasn't able to find that user account. This is how we're going to determine if the user account exists. So up here under this function, what we need to do is write an if statement. So we're going to say if test1 is equal to null, and I'm using a capital N there, and we're going to say and test2. I need to make sure I spell this stuff right. My keyboard is kind of, we're going to blame it on the keyboard. Of course, it's not the user, it's definitely the keyboard. So test1 and test2 is equal to null, then we're going to return false. So we're going to say this user account is not in use. And then we're going to close this with a brace here. And we're going to say else return true. Okay? So let's go ahead and test this function by selecting the entire function, right-clicking and choosing copy. Now we're going to come down to the blue code here, and we're going to right-click and choose paste, and we're going to press enter. Okay, so now we can run this function. So I'm going to expand this a little bit so you can see what's going on. So we're going to type in username taken. And then in quotes, I'm going to say P Hill. And I'm going to press enter. Okay, and I messed up here. We need to do a capital F, and let's move that cursor so you can see. We need to do the $sign and a capital F. So it's $sign, capital T, and then true, and then capital sign, or $sign, and then capital false, with the first letter being capital. So I'm gonna recopy this. And that's why it's good to just run your code down here in the bottom, because you catch little mistakes like that. So, okay, we're gonna run username taken, P Hill. And we can see that it returned true. So it thinks that P Hill is already in use. And we know that it is in use, because I'm looking at the account right there. So now if we try P Hill 1, it returns false. Okay? So now we have a good way of testing of whether our user accounts have been created or not, or whether they're not in use. So I think we're about ready to run this script now. So let me just double check everything here.
Mouth shining like Paul Wall, reflection on the wall.
Save this. At the top, okay, so this is all the same. We haven't changed anything here. We have our account number,
VVS is on my
which is
neck.
going to be equal to this verify username, and our verify username is returning this interval, or this variable called I, or it's returning the string. So this variable could end up being nothing, but we're still appending it to the end of our name. All right. So down here under name, we're updating this because you cannot have duplicate names, just like you can't have duplicate usernames. So we're having first name space last name space account number. Then we're going to have given name, first name, surname. That's all the same. And then we're going to have username, which is first name, first initial, first character of the first name. We have last name, and then the account number. Then we're declaring the user principal name and the SAM account name. Okay, and that's all that we've changed so far. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hit the play button, and I'm going to type in the path to our CSV file. So it's new users.csv, and I'm going to press enter. Okay, so now I'll go over to Active Directory, and I'm going to hit F5. And we can see that the user accounts have been created. So we have Clyde Braden, and if I open this account and I go to account, we can see that it's using first initial, last name, so C Braden. Now, if we run the script again, and we do same path, new users.csv, it should append a 1 to all of those usernames. So now we're going to open Active Directory, and we're going to hit refresh. And now we can see that we have 2 cloud ratings. So cloud rating 1, and if I double click on this and get to account, you can see we have C rating. Now let's just for fun run it one more time and see if we can end up with cloud rating 2.
That's all I know about.
New users.csv. Press enter and refresh. And it's not working.
Oh Lord, have a mercy.
And let's see how it
have a mercy
upon I had to click over here on the left. So now I have cloud rating 2. So if I hit account, I can see the appended so that's how you would switch the usernames to first initial to last name and how you append a number to the end of the script. So these functions are really useful. You can see that instead, I could have really done this in one function, but it was just easier for me to just use a tasting function and then call it a
just a regular human being. I'm nobody.
So hopefully you found this lecture useful. I hope it taught you some more about PowerShell and
I'm not nobody special.
I sure did enjoy making it for you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next lecture.
I'm not famous. I'm not. I'm just a regular.
In this lecture, you will learn how you can use Windows Server Backup to safely backup your Active Directory data. Having and maintaining Active Directory backups is a critical aspect of administrating your network. It's very important that you take proper backups and that you understand how to restore those backups should a catastrophic failure occur. So in this lecture, you'll be learning how to create the backups. So what we're going to do is in Server Manager, we're going to click Tools, and we're going to go down to Windows Server Backup. Now, if you don't have this installed, you can quickly install by clicking Manage, Add Rules, and Features. Then when you get to the Features page, you're going to go down to the bottom, and you're going to install the Windows Server Backup feature. This will not require a reboot, and you should already be familiar with this, as this was covered in the previous module for Windows Server. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that I have a shared drive created on this server, on the C drive, called Backups. So if I go //sadco1, I can go to /backups, and I can store the backups inside of this folder. Just to demonstrate where this is located, go back to the C drive, and I'll open the backups folder, and I can see that new text created. So the way that Windows Server Backup works is that it wants to either use an entire drive on your local computer that is attached to your local computer. This server only has the C drive, so what we're going to do is use a network share, which is the alternative. And that network share will be this backups folder. Okay? So I'm going to select Tools and open Windows Server Backup. You'll want to wait until it loads. And then once the load is complete, right-click on Local Backup and choose either Backup Once or Backup Schedule. Now, if you're in a production network, I really recommend that you set up a backup schedule. However, since we're in a test lab environment, I'm only going to say Backup Once. Now, we don't have a schedule backup created, so we're just going to say different options, and we'll click next. We're going to say custom, because we don't want to back up the full server. All we really want to back up is our Active Directory. So I'll click next. And we're going to select Add Items. And to back up Active Directory, we need to choose the system state. Now we'll click OK. And we're going to click next. So now we need to choose where we want to store the destination file. Now, we could choose a local hard drive if we had one attached. If I try to select this option and I click Next, it'll say cannot create backup because there are no backup storage locations available. So it wants us to create another partition or add another disk. So the way that Windows Server Backup works is that it wants to either use an entire drive on your local computer that is attached to your local computer. This server only has the C drive. So what we're going to do is use a network share, which is the alternative. And that network share will be this backups folder. Okay? So I'm going to select Tools and open Windows Server Backup. You'll want to wait until it loads. And then once the load is complete, right-click on Local Backup and choose either Backup Once or Backup Schedule. Now, if you're in a production network, I really recommend that you set up a backup schedule. However, since we're in a test lab environment, I'm only going to say Backup Once. Now, we don't have a schedule backup created, so we're just going to say different options, and we'll click next. We're going to say custom, because we don't want to back up the full server. All we really want to back up is our Active Directory. I'll click next, and we're going to select Add Items. And to back up Active Directory, we need to choose the system state. Now we'll click OK, and we're going to click next. So now we need to choose where we want to store the destination file. Now, we could choose a local hard drive if we had one attached. If I try to select this option and I click next, it'll say cannot create backup because there are no backup storage locations available. So it wants us to create another partition or add another disk, which we don't have at this time. So we're just going to say remote shared folder, and we can kind of bypass this safety check by using a remote shared folder that's on the C drive. So the location is going to be sadc01 /, and then it auto-completes for me. We're going to choose backups. Now under access control, I'm just going to leave it at inherit to inherit the security permissions of this folder. I'll click next, and I will click backup. So now we just need to wait for the backup to complete. So go ahead and take a break. I expect this will take anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. We'll go ahead and wait for that to complete, and we'll come back when we're started. Okay, so our backup is now complete. Here I can see that we have another backup scheduled for March 31 at 9 p.m. This is all just stuff that I created before I started this lecture. Additionally, you'll see that I have a total of 2 backups. That's because I ran a backup before. The oldest copy was from 6/7/2019. The latest copy was the one that I just ran today on March 31. So what we can do now is open Windows Explorer, and we can go to the C drive, and I can go to backups, and I can open the Windows image backup folder. I have sadc01 and the backup that was created on this date. Okay, so this is where our backups are located. If I go back here and right-click on the folder and go to Properties, I can see that it's 8.19 gigabytes. So that is how you can back up your Active Directory infrastructure with Windows Backup. I hope you enjoyed that lecture. Great job getting through it, and I will see you in the next one. In this lecture, you're going to learn how you can restore an Active Directory system state backup all the way to catastrophic failure of your server, or maybe just someone goes into Active Directory and blows a bunch of stuff up. In this lecture, you're going to learn how you can restore one of your backups that we created earlier. So, to get started, what I'm going to do in Active Directory, I'm going to go ahead and just delete this organizational unit. Okay, so I need to do as much damage to this as I can. So first thing I'm going to do is turn on advanced features. And I'm going to go to Server Academy, and I'm just going to start removing all the protections. So I'm going to Object, Protect from Accidental Deletion. I'm going to uncheck that and click OK. I'm going to repeat that for all these other organizational units as well.
Even though I'm marked for death, I'm a spark to the
Okay, so now what I'm going to do is right-click this OU, and I'm just going to delete it. So I'll say yes, I want to delete it. And we're going to say use subtree server control. And I'll say yes. And we just blew away the entire organizational unit that holds all the infrastructure, all the users, all the computers for our domain. Not including our domain controllers, and that doesn't matter too much. But we just created a big problem for ourselves. None of our user accounts can now log in, and we're going to have a big headache because we have to go back in, try and recreate that OU structure, and it's just going to be a lot of work that you probably won't be able to do very successfully. So thankfully, we've taken a backup. What we need to do now is go ahead and restore that backup. So we have to boot the server in DSRM mode, or Directory Services Restore mode. So we can do that a couple different ways. First, we can just reboot the server and keep button mashing F8 until we get to the boot menu, and then we can select DSRM. Or we can hit Start and type in msconfig, and we can